Okay, hello everyone. Can people in the chat confirm that you can hear me? Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna be using this chat a lot today. So if people want to be active in it, that would be absolutely awesome. To start off, we'll just give another minute or two just to let people join. Where's everyone joining from? Post where you are. I saw some people posting. We got people worldwide. But yeah, post where you are. Uh, Awesome. We got an alien that's on that intergalactic comet coming through. That's pretty cool. I saw that. But yeah, we get going. All right, so I'm from Philadelphia, so I don't really want to hear the Texas people talking after yesterday. So please be respectful. Uh, that's a sports reference for people that don't know. But excited to get going today. So we'll start off. Yeah, welcome to today's Flare Academy. Uh, And today we're going to be talking about from Active Directory to Entra ID. We're going to go through some of the history of Active Directory, Entra ID, what Active Directory and Entra are, various attacks. Can I kick people out of here that talk about the Cowboys? Is that allowed? All right, Flair told me no. Flair told me no. All right, so we're going to be talking about Active Directory, Entra ID, history, attacks, defenses, prevention. I do want to make it clear that I'm trying to keep this as high level as I possibly can. Yes, we will be going into details for some stuff, but I don't want to go super technical with some of these things because I think we'll kind of get lost if we go super technical and super into the weeds. But the idea is to really walk you through these different concepts, show you, we'll talk you through the attacks, talk you through how you could go about preventing them and what to look for in your environment. All right, so next slide. Who am I? Great question, everyone. My name is Mike Iaconianni. I'm a product manager here at Flare. Super excited to be here. I actually started off coming in as the subject matter expert for identity, but things changed. And I'm a former consultant. I was a manager at a consultancy firm. I worked there for 7 years. During COVID, rather than starting up Stardew Valley, I went deep into Active Directory and actually started our Active Directory assessment methodology. So that's what I'm going to be. That's why I know essentially all these things I know today. I ran probably around 100 Active Directory Entra ID assessments. I was in many environments, seeing various Active Directory implementations, Entra ID implementations, and yeah, excited to talk to you about just some of the most common misconfigurations I saw. My LinkedIn is right here. If you want to follow me, if you want to join, well, I hope you're already on LinkedIn. You're not joining, but if you want to follow me, feel free to if you want to connect. And like I said, I'm in Philadelphia. If anyone else is in Philly, that's awesome. Maybe we can grab coffee. And excited to get going with this. I'm seeing people say there's some audio issues. All right. Is this any better? All right, how's it? How's it now? I All right, if it happens when I talk, maybe I just shouldn't talk. All right, we're just gonna get going. If it's really that bad, people let me know. Okay, cool. All right, so we are going to start off with our history lesson from Active Directory to SSO. So right here, we're going to jump right in. We have some pictures here right on the right that kind of uh, summarize Active Directory in a nutshell. But we're going to start off with the start of this, the start of Microsoft Identity, the journey from Active Directory to essentially where we are today and beyond. So Microsoft started AD in the year around 2000. There were many Microsoft products before that, as we know, many Windows products before that. But essentially, there was a need to bring them together into a network to be able to allow you to access all of these different resources within a singular company. So Microsoft started AD, Active Directory. Essentially, the thesis of this, the big thing about this, the big thing that really helped them take off was that it enabled a user to log in to their computer. So you would log into your computer and then log into all of the company resources that were there as well. So from just logging into your computer, you could access file shares, you could access printers, internal applications, all these group policies, all of these different things. This was really the turning point for this. This was the start of this. No one had done this before. And it's kind of funny because if you think about it, it really is kind of single sign-on, right? You're logging into one thing and you're able to access all of these different things. So the concept for this was always there and really started many years ago. This was essentially done through Kerberos. I'm not going to explain Kerberos at a super detailed level, but essentially this is the system Microsoft uses for authentication. It gives you a ticket. Your ticket is able to be passed on to all of these different items for you to be able to authenticate and access them. With that as well, Microsoft started off with group policy. So group policy is the ability to set specific settings and push them down to a group of users, computers, a specific domain, a specific OU, all of that fun stuff. And this was really what got Microsoft to essentially be the king of company infrastructure. This really simplified the capabilities, and it was able to displace a lot of other systems that are honestly before my time, NetWare, NIS, and a couple other things. So continuing here, we get to the birth of single sign-on. So so from here, Microsoft's Active Directory was really taken off. People were really getting onboarded with it. But there was already the initial need in 2001 to access various applications. We already saw applications moving to the internet, and Microsoft launched Passport in 2001. And I'm seeing there's still audio issues. I'm guessing this is. Okay. I can try my other mic again, but we're just going to keep going for now. Okay, so as applications moved to the internet, there was a need to be able to access them, to be able to have single sign-on. We can see here, Clippy is hatching single sign-on right here, so it's something that's coming. So Microsoft started to have various resources across the internet. A lot of companies had resources across the internet. Passport was launched in 2001 as a way to authenticate. This was to access Microsoft applications. So Hotmail, for example, was a big one. If anyone still has Hotmail, post in the chat. That'd be really cool. And it was also used for Xbox, which is funny to think in retrospect. This was something that was like Microsoft created. Things would really only work with Microsoft devices, Microsoft technologies, and it was centralized amongst their technology. Additionally, Microsoft started Active Directory Federation services. So the idea with this is when you log in, you would also get a claim to access these various applications. We'll talk a little bit more about ADFS a little bit later because this is something that's still used today. And there are some interesting things with it. So Google responded with their own authentication system. And then you kind of start to have all these different technology companies making their own authentication systems, and it kind of started to become divided amongst all of them. So in the later 2000s, Microsoft, Google, Twitter, Yahoo, the tech giants of the time, which are mostly the tech giants of today also, except for one of these, and one of them was renamed, came together to make OAuth. So the OAuth protocol was created and was decided that this was going to be centralized amongst everyone for single sign-on for applications, for all this good stuff. Passport was renamed to Windows Live ID. It later became Microsoft Accounts, which we use today. So from here, Entra ID has arrived. We can see Clippy and SSO welcoming Entra ID, freshly born. Microsoft renamed Azure AD to Entra ID, but it was first Azure AD, which has a lot of confusion associated with it. It's people thought you needed to have Active Directory to have Azure AD. That wasn't the case. So Microsoft renamed it to Entra ID. Entra comes from entrar, the Spanish verb to enter. So it's not Entra. I've said that quite a bit. It is Entra. That's your fun fact of the day. If you take one thing away from this, I hope it is that. Active Directory sync is implemented. Essentially, companies are able to sync their internal domain with their online domain to be able to bring their users up to the cloud. We'll talk more about that later. Actually, we'll talk about more of pretty much everything on this slide later. Conditional access policies are introduced. These are the create, block. These are the block or grant conditions that use a variety of identity signals, such as who you are, where you are, what device you're using, what you're trying to access. Arguably, conditional access policies are the basis for zero trust. Someone remind me to offer my opinion on zero trust a bit later. PIM is introduced, privileged identity management. This is where just-in-time access starts to really become a big deal and where you're able to use it. And then Microsoft is also, with the applications that are in place, enabling users to have admin consent, which has a whole fun thing of itself as well. So then from here, where are we going from here? So that's a great question. So next, AI is the next frontier. Microsoft had Ignite last week where they talked a bit more about their vision for AI. But Microsoft created what's called frontier firms, where essentially employees manage the different AI agents within the company. I don't think these have been doing super hot. I've been seeing some interesting things about them. But essentially the idea is that like AI would take over for the different divisions like marketing, HR, and then the users will overall manage them. I think one of the more interesting things that we're already seeing is AI agents within Entra, since applications, AI uses essentially the backbone applications use. So it's using that same type of infrastructure to come in. We're already seeing a bunch of AI agents starting to come in. That's anything from like Microsoft's conditional access optimizer to AI agents companies make themselves around MCP servers. It's going to be really, really important to audit these and to understand the ones you have in your environment, because just like applications, the risks with those will also go to AI agents and even a bit more. Has anyone played around with the AI agents in Entra today? Yeah, that's kind of what I would expect. They're still relatively new. I do recommend taking a look at, if you have conditional access policies set up, using the conditional access policy optimizer. I've been seeing some really good stats related to that and how that's able to really help identify gaps in place. This is something I do also recommend to start reading into this, to start looking into it a little bit more. I know there's a lot of tech debt already, but this is something that could just pile on top of it. Here we do have a timeline of Active Directory. Essentially, I'm not going to get super into all of these blocks because we also really started with our history lesson right here. well, right here in 1999, where they preview AD. But I think one of the really interesting things to call out about this is that we can see Active Directory has been around for, I mean, the bones of it have been around for a really long time at this point. And one of the issues with it, one of the reasons why it's the way it is because Microsoft tried to keep as much of it backwards compatible as possible. So when you have like Windows 2000, you're supposed to be able to still talk to Windows of today, which is really interesting. Entra was kind of their area to put a little bit of a line in the sand to separate themselves from some of those older vulnerabilities or features that we'll talk about in a couple minutes. But a lot of these things, a lot of these things do stem from needing to be backwards compatible and having these features, these vulnerabilities keep carrying forward. So with all that said, with the move to AI agents, with the move to essentially where Microsoft is going, it does beg the question of why does Active Directory security matter in 2025, almost 2026? Does anyone want to try to answer this in the chat? Yeah, everyone pretty much now. Yeah, yeah. AD is incredibly vulnerable. It's funny because we see companies moving more and more to this new infrastructure. Well, not even new infrastructure, moving to AI agents. And as they do this, they're essentially just forgetting about Active Directory. I've always liked to equate that Active Directory is kind of the ugly stepchild of the various products we have. It is something that isn't always managed really well. It's something that's always forgotten about. Companies now are worried about the AI vulnerabilities, but a lot of these vulnerabilities that we're going to talk about today are still going to be present in these environments. Even if you have I guarantee you have probably forgotten about like where your SPNs are, where systems with unconstrained delegation are, all of these fun things that we'll be talking about. Also, it is really interesting. Jeff called out that on-prem is still a better experience because it really won't have outages. And that has probably the most likes I've seen on any comment here so far. One of the really interesting things that I've heard about, and I was at Identiverse last week, is that companies are starting to take their IDPs and host them more and more on-prem, which is really which is a really interesting thing. There are some companies where, like, if you have an IT outage, that once it gets to about 30 minutes, they have to send everyone home. It's just kind of the way their conditions are. And then they lose out on so much money because of that. They still have to pay them, et cetera, et cetera. So companies are starting to actually put their IDP back on-prem. Cool. Any questions about anything so far before we move on? Okay. So next, we're gonna just very briefly go through just some very basic stuff of Active Directory. A lot of this stuff was already said, but it's important to understand this and make sure we're all on the same page. So AD is a centralized network to manage these various Windows-based resources. The idea of it is to be backwards compatible, being able to manage Windows 2000, Windows XP, to Windows 11, and really everything in between. Like I said, the thesis of it is to be able to log in once, get that TGT ticket, and be able to use that to log into essentially all files, all file shares, all resources related to a user without having to continuously log in. The next thing that's really important to understand is that everything in Active Directory, so Active Directory is made up of objects. Everything in it is an object. You have domains, downward from domains. You have organizational, well, at the top you have forests. Forests contain domains. Domain contains organizational units. Essentially, and from there you have have groups, which contain computers, users. You have GPOs, you have everything. Not everything, but you have a bunch of different object types themselves. These types all have relationships to each other. So all of these objects, I don't want to say talk to each other, but they have relationships. So like a computer will have a session with a user logged in. A user will have access to various computers. GPOs will be pushed down to various OUs, which contain users, which contain, well, OUs contain users and computers. We'll talk more about these relationships a bit later. I saw someone in the chat already brought up Bloodhound. We will be talking about Bloodhound as well. We will have some very simplified attack graphs to go through later as well. It is important to understand that domain controllers govern logins. I'm sure most people here are familiar with domain controllers today. That's where the ntds.dit file is. And then protocols are NTLM and Kerberos. We talked a bit about Kerberos earlier, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a second. So the next thing to really understand is the enterprise access model. Difference between OUs and groups. So OUs are organizational units. So organizational units essentially will contain groups within it. Groups are usually like groups of users or computers as well. Organizational units will contain groups. They'll contain GPOs. They'll contain all of the different objects within those. And essentially, you will apply GPOs at the OU level. Hopefully that clears up your confusion. So next we get into the enterprise access model. So this is essentially the basis for how you would go about tiering or separating your Active Directory and your Entra environment as well. There's aspects of that that are included within this. This is hard to implement, if I'm being completely honest. This is something that companies often struggle with, and a lot of companies haven't even necessarily heard of. But this is one of the big things I used to really evaluate, used to educate people on. So we'll talk through it. The idea is to create 3 mostly separate environments for your infrastructure. So at the top, we have tier 0. So this is where your like domain controllers, your domain admins, your Entra ID Connect infrastructure. This is where this exists. What's really interesting about this is that there's a lot of tier 0. Tier 0 is defined as anything that can control the environment, that can control the domain, that essentially an attacker would go after. These are anything that can give you the keys to the kingdom. And there's probably, I think, a little bit over 20 to 30 groups or different users that are considered tier 0. I have a link to them right here from our good friends at SpectreOps. And this is really cool because this will essentially show you the name of it. It'll give you the SID. It'll give you if it's an Active Directory or Entra. It'll give you the reasoning for it, because a lot of times people will be like, okay, well, why is account operators considered a tier 0? Well, that's because it has the ability to access every single account and edit every single account within the environment. So like I said, there's a bunch of these, and most companies don't know this. Most companies don't know that like print operators are able to install print drivers right onto domain controllers, which is not great. I just posted the link here, so feel free to take a look at this yourself. It also has Microsoft documentation associated with this, but all of these are considered tier 0. So most of the times people just think, well, I have my domain controllers secured, I have my domain admin secured, I'm okay. No, unfortunately, that's not the case. There's a lot more. So let's go back to this. So that's your tier 0. This was developed by Microsoft, the enterprise access model. But then third parties like SpectreOps really made their name in this. So Yeah, we'll talk more about Bloodhound later. The next tier is tier 1. This is supposed to be your server plane. So this is where your servers are, your server users, and your server administrators. And then tier 2 is essentially your user base. That's where your workstations are, your domain users, Karen from accounting, who's probably going to get phished, all of these fun people there. The idea with this, like I said, is to have these 3 tiers, but to have them separate, which this image right here hopefully illustrates, but we'll talk through this. The idea with it is that tier 0 should only be able to access tier 0. So you don't want tier 0 being able to go down to tier 1. You want your domain controllers, your domain admins, all those critical accounts only within tier 0. Next, we have tier 1. Like I said, this is where servers. The idea with this is to only really have tier 1 access tier 1. Like, you want all these systems to only be able to access the systems with their associated tiers. Yes, there are going to be breaking points where you're going to have tier 0s going down to tier 1. That is something that does have to happen, or tier 1 going up to tier 0. To answer the question in the chat, so there's a couple different ways to go about it to separate them. The way I would always recommend would be user rights assignments. So essentially configuring what users and what groups are able to log onto which systems. VLAN segmentation is great as well. You have to be careful not to break things when you're doing that. So just keep that in mind as you go about it. But user rights assignment is really the best way to go about this. Any questions on the enterprise access model before we move on? This is an important concept to get. Great question. Does PIM come into play in this? Right now we're trying. PIM would be more so within Entra. We'll talk about PIM a little bit later. There is some there's not an official enterprise access model for PIM. People have actually created tiers for the different PIM roles, which we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a bit later. User rights assignment would be through GPO. That's a good question. I should have mentioned that. Thank you. What is an appropriate use of cross communication between the tiers? Yeah, that's a good question as well. It's more so. This just like you, for whatever reason, you would need a domain admin to configure something on a server. That server should then be tier 0. I mean, it's really just the way the web of Active Directory gets spread out that these systems are constantly crossing. Like the biggest example is just seeing domain admins just randomly being logged onto servers because people don't have oh, that's a good question. People don't have separate accounts for their everyday operations, or like they're an IT admin and they'll be using their domain admin account instead of their IT admin account, or they don't have an IT admin account. They just use domain admin, which is really scary. How come there's a server admin in both tier 0 and tier 1? Yeah, that's a really good point. When I said server administrators, I wasn't talking about the official Microsoft group. Microsoft has a built-in group called server admins, which in this case is tier 0. When I say server administrators, I mean like your administrators for your servers. Hopefully that clears it up. All right, so then continuing to Active Directory attacks and prevention. So I will also preface this with I don't really get too much into detection with these things. If I'm being completely honest, I think it's really hard at this point for enterprise to have rules to detect some of these items like Kerberoasting and stuff. I think your better bet is to use the various products out there that do detect it and do keep up with how attackers are changing their telemetry and the different things that are being done there. So we're going to start off with Kerberoasting. And like I said, we're going to take this stuff at a high level so that we can keep it as clear as we can. So in Active Directory, some accounts have service principal names. This was created essentially for the double hop issue that Microsoft had. But like I said, to keep this really simple, a service principal name is to act as a signpost to authorize to a different application. So you have like a user on an SQL. You have a user, an account that needs to write stuff to an SQL server. They would have a service principal name so that they're authenticated to that SQL server. Attackers, and this is just a feature of Active Directory, attackers are essentially able to request all of the SPNs in an environment, and then they could get them back. So I could just be authenticated as a domain user and say, hey, give me back every service principal name. And I would get back every service principal name using a tool like Rubius. With that, I can then take the NTLM hash associated with it, and I can attempt to crack it. If I have a cracker that I'm able to use for that, that's not mining Bitcoin or anything, I can get the clear text credential back from that NTLM hash, and then I'm able to authenticate as tier 0. I'm sorry, not as tier 0. I was reading a comment there. I'm able to authenticate as that user. So the request all service principal names, get the tickets for them, and then from there, crack the associated NTLM hash. And then I'm able to authenticate as that account if I can. So I'll take a second to answer these questions before I move forward because I see quite a bit coming in. So why would accounts add SPNs? These are just often needed in the environment. Some specific applications may require them. It's just kind of the native functionality of like the double hop issue of needing to be able to log into AD and being able to log into another application at the same time. It's something that really is just kind of fine-grained into Active Directory. Is there a way to see if someone has made the request for Kerberoasting? I think it's event ID 4768, something along those lines. There is an event ID associated with it that you're able to pull back if you have your event IDs coming in from your domain controllers. Hopefully you are, but I understand the issues associated with that sometimes. Yeah, the level of logging is difficult. If you have Entra ID and if you have an E5 license, I believe you have Defender for Identity for free. I don't know if that's still the case. So if that is the case, that's definitely something I recommend because it's, like I said, it's really hard to have a Kerberoasting rule. We've tried to implement them before, and we definitely have, don't get me wrong, but they're just super noisy. So that's why I recommend using some sort of identity product for that. I think I got all the questions. Was there another one? Awesome. Thank you, Robin. So one of the really sad things about this attack is just how effective it is. We oftentimes will see various tier 0 accounts having a service principal name. Oh, it was 4769. I was close. I think I said 4768. But we will often see tier 0 accounts like domain admins having service principal names attached to this. Those were always easy weeks for the pen testers because you would just get an environment, you would Kerberos, you would crack the hash, and then from there you would authenticate as that tier 0 user and you own the environment. It is really, yeah, you can pass the hash as well. EDR would detect tools like Rubius, for sure. That's assuming they run it on disk. Oftentimes, remember, attackers will get access to the environment, and then they'll use something like Cobalt Strike or Mythic or Nighthawk or a different C2 framework, and then they will try to run these things in memory to prevent detection for it. That's when like a lot of the more anomaly-based detections come in handy. But yeah, EDR can be effective against this. But I personally think the best way to be effective for this is to understand where your SPNs are. So understand what accounts have service principal names attached to them. You're going to have them in your environment. It's very unlikely you don't. Just make sure none of them are associated with those tier 0 groups that we had talked about before. If they are, make sure you understand why they are, and try to have as many restrictions around it as possible. So, like, for example, using user rights assignments to prevent people from being able to log in with them on systems you wouldn't want them to log in. If you know an account only logs into one system and has a service principal name associated with it, restrict it to just that one system. Utilize strong passwords. I say 128 characters. I know what that sounds. Microsoft actually has group managed service accounts where they will manage the password for service principal names, and they will use 128 characters with it. Any questions on this? Okay. Next, we'll move to Mimikatz. I'm sure we all have heard of Mimikatz. It would be really hard to get rid of service principal names because there are various applications that just need them. It's unfortunately just the way it is. Yeah, so Mimikatz was originally a proof of concept that really took the red team world by storm. We're like I said, we're gonna keep it simple. You can use it to pass the hash. You can use it for a lot of different things. Uh, Essentially, when you log into a computer, your credentials are stored in LSASS, and Mimikatz allows you to take LSASS and extract the credentials from it. It's just that simple. It's just a way to get passwords of users that are logged into a computer. So how do we go about protecting it? Protecting against it? The protections against Mimikatz are okay. The idea with this is to reduce the blast radius. You're going to be hopeful that your EDR will detect this. That's not always the case. There are various ways attackers will try to dump LSAS to get the associated credentials in it. But the idea I would always try to, well, the concept that I always try to give is reducing the blast radius associated with it. So there, Microsoft has protected users, a protected users group, which essentially prevents older types of authentication from being used. Credential Guard is Microsoft's big push as well. Credential Guard is virtualizing the LSAS process to make it harder for Mimikatz to be able to extract the credentials from. This is built into Windows 11. I believe it's even built into newer versions of Windows 10. However, this isn't foolproof. My red teaming friends always love to tell me that it's not foolproof. And I mean, even today, I think like a week ago, I saw some Credential Guard bypass going around as well. I put strong EDR there with a fun smiley face because we know the challenges that can have sometimes. I also recommend turning off reducing credential caching to like 5 to 3 or 5. By default, Windows will take the last 10 credentials and cache them on the computer you log into. Lastly, removing the SE debug permissions. This one is challenging, but it's pretty rewarding. Mimikatz uses the SE debug permission to essentially debug LSAS to extract these passwords. Removing that from the user rights assignments is a good way to limit it. However, I know it's really hard to do. This is something I don't think I've seen many people be able to successfully implement, but it is a solution I wanted to offer. So next, we're going to talk about unconstrained delegation. So the idea with this is essentially some computers will be trusted to delegate to any service through Kerberos. Like this is the exact name of the setting. So then when a user logs into that system, having their password cached, they'll have their TGT, their Kerberos ticket granting ticket, also stored within LSAS. So if an attacker were to use something like Mimikatz, once again, they would be able to extract it and they would be able to impersonate that said user with the TGT, so pass the ticket right there. There's essentially the limitation with this attack is you need the user to somehow authenticate to the system that you compromised. However, thanks to the print nightmare that went around a couple years ago, uh, if you have print spooler running on your domain controllers, it is possible to abuse the MS RPRN printer bug to get domain controllers, to get that authentication back from domain controllers that you can then take that TGT for and escalate your attack. Unconstrained delegation is also just kind of nasty. Like, it's the basis for several other attacks. One example being curb relay up. There's a couple others as well. This is something that's kind of similar to service principal names. It's something that like just gets set in the environment and people forget about it. Like I said, Active Directory is the ugly duckling of the various infrastructure that you have. I'll probably say that at least 2 or 3 more times throughout this training. And stuff just gets set, and it gets set by IT admins many years ago that are probably no longer at the company, and just gets left in place. And from there, it's usually discovered by an attacker or someone that, or hopefully some various tool or some consultant that comes into the environment. So unconstrained delegation, the simple way to prevent it is to use constrained delegation. So I think this screenshot is from a very older Windows version, but the checkbox is still the same. Account is sensitive and cannot be delegated. You want to have that checked for really as many privileged accounts as you have. I believe putting it in protected users will do this by default. I'm pretty sure about that. Utilize the tiering model to prevent these sensitive accounts from logging into systems that could potentially have unconstrained delegation. And just understanding where unconstrained delegation is in place. Because I guarantee you, most of the time, you could just switch it to constrained delegation to just do the specific accounts that it needs to do it for. So I have a question for the chat. Domain controllers by default have unconstrained delegation enabled. Does that matter? Okay, so this is a big misconception. It really doesn't, because if someone gets onto a domain controller, they're not going to they're not going to use the unconstrained delegation on there to impersonate another account. Yeah, like once you get on there, once you've compromised, like once you get to the domain controller, it's game over, kind of. So you're not necessarily going to, from there, want to lure another account for it. I mean, you could, but from there, you've got higher priorities. You've got better ways to escalate the attack. So next we have certificate services. Once again, another set it and forget it thing. These are certificates that are set up in the environment for various infrastructure used in encryption, authentication, digital signatures. These are so often misconfigured as well. I can't tell you how many times my red teaming friends, their work was done Monday morning because someone had a certificate where you could enroll, get it back to be any user in the environment, no manager approval required, just use certify with like just a couple arguments, and you have domain admins or schema operators or backup operators or any of those different ones. And you just get the certificate back for that user, authenticate that user, and then you're done. There's 13 different types of vulnerabilities associated with certificate services. They are ESC 1 through 13. You can read about them. I'm not essentially going to get into the nitty gritty with this because it's it's really complex, but it's really important to understand these certificates, where they're setting your how they're set up in your environment. Because once again, I'm telling you, it's going to be an IT admin that was there 10, 20 years ago that set these up for one specific testing purpose, and no one noticed it until your red teamer or attacker got into the environment. So it's really important to have some sort of process. Maybe have that quarterly, maybe have that twice a year, where you use a tool like Certify to pull back the certificates that are in place and understand what's there and remove any vulnerable ones in place. Have some sort of approval process in place for creating certificates so that, oh wow, there's 16 of them now, according to that comment. Okay, they keep growing every single day. But have some sort of process in place when you implement these to make sure more than one person is looking at them to understand what's being put into place. I even say for a lot of these require manager approval. Like that's one in the certificate itself, require manager approval for some of these as well, just so you have a second set of eyes looking at this. And yeah, some of these were patched by Microsoft, but not all of them. So next, we have a fun hodgepodge of various Active Directory misconfigurations. So I said the first one earlier, but print spooler is enabled on domain controllers. The print nightmare fiasco from a couple years ago. I can't tell you how many domain controllers I saw that had print spooler enabled. Honestly, way too many. It's something that I'm still surprised we're seeing in 2025, but it's something we'll probably continue to see. Another one is SMB v1 is enabled on domain controllers. This is a really rough one, especially in hospitals. In hospitals, a lot of the issues there. Is anyone here from a hospital, actually? But in hospitals, there's a lot of medical devices that work on Windows XP, all of these older ones. I mean, like imagine being in a hospital and the device keeping you alive is on Windows XP. It's pretty scary. But because of that, they need SMBv1. So that's where it gets really hard, and that's why a lot of the time these older protocols are still active in their environment. The recommendation around there is to try to use some sort of firewall to understand where your SMBv1 traffic is coming from and restrict it to only to only those IP ranges, which I understand is still a challenge, and that could be a huge project. Additionally, I know there's several products out there. I don't know them off the top of my head that will straight up fingerprint your devices and tell you like what protocols and what ports are associated with them. Yeah, order. There we go. That one was really cool. And you'll be able to have that fingerprint for the device, so you'll be able to detect anything that goes outside of that. But still, that is another project, that is another resourcing, and I I can already see companies saying, well, AI agents are more important than understanding our devices running Windows XP, without fully realizing what they're saying for that. The next one, and this is another one I've seen a lot, vulnerability scanners are tier 0 accounts. This is kind of one where I would just roll my eyes at when I would see it. I would see it way more than I wanted to as well. And it was often a battle as well, trying to get companies to understand why this is really bad. Essentially, I've seen like Tenable, Rapid7 as a domain admin. Does anyone here want to actually attempt to, does anyone here want to say why that is bad if you have something as such as Tenable or Rapid7 performing authenticated scans on every machine as a domain admin? I wish I had prizes to give out. Yeah, Drew Young already said it. Is this the Drew Young I used to work with, or is this a different Drew Young? I guess I'll never know. But yeah, you are. Oh, wow, that's funny. So because the DevOps said it is needed. That's a good answer, Miguel, and I feel that. Uh, so I do know some vendors will tell you their products need to be domain admin. Actually, let me finish this thought before I jump out of this into this next thought. When you are essentially running as Rapid7, you're running authenticated scans on every single system in your environment. So from there, you are caching your domain admin credentials on every single computer that it touches, since it's essentially logging in. So then from there, what's happening is you can have someone just land in the environment, potentially run Mimikatz to extract those credentials from LSAS, and you have your domain admins right there. It breaks the enterprise access model. There's no tiering in place. The recommendation for it would be to use agent-based scanning, or alternatively, just as you have the enterprise access model, have a tier 0 scanner, tier 1 scanner, tier 2 scanner. Agent-based scanning is the best option, though, because the whole goal of the enterprise access model is to limit credential sprawl as much as you can. But the tangent I was about to go on, yeah, you will often have vendors tell you it needs to be tier 0. I do recommend pushing back where you can, asking, does it really need to be tier 0? Having them give you reasoning for why. I don't really understand why any vendor is coming in and demanding that they become a domain admin. That's just kind of crazy talk to me. The next is absence of separate accounts. I kind of said this earlier, but too often will I also see users using their same account that they use to check email, to log into a domain controller, to configure GPOs. Separate accounts for that. It could just be your normal one, then your dash admin one. Another one's old passwords. Since I said earlier, there's a lot of tier 0 accounts in place. Since it's very easy to forget about them, and it's very easy to not change the passwords associated with them. I have in the past found passwords older than interns I had worked with, which was really scary for tier 0 accounts. Next is domain controller ownership. So when you promote a server to a domain controller, the user that promoted it is then the owner of it, and you need to change the ownership of it afterwards. Essentially, the issue with that is that if you own a system, you have like full access to it, full rights to it. And too often than not, did I see the case where your simple IT users were owners of it. So if that IT user was compromised, from there, they could very easily pivot to a domain controller. This next one is a default one. Default setting, users can add 10 additional users to the environment. This with unconstrained delegation is a prereq for many messy attacks like curb relay up. Just recommend disabling this. Users can DCSync. I didn't really get too much into what DCSync is, but essentially DCSync is saying, hey, I'm a domain controller. Send me other information domain controllers have, like the NTDS stits file, so that I am able to act as a domain controller. It's replication rights. This is something that sometimes random users have. I don't always understand why, but random users will have DCSync capabilities. So it's really important to understand who has that and restrict those. Next is the Kerb TGT account. This is something that many people do not know about, but essentially the Kerb TGT account is the account that signs every Kerberoast ticket. And this account is another one that often goes without a password change. I think pretty much every client I did an Active Directory assessment for, their Kerb TGT account password hadn't been changed in years. Microsoft recommends changing this twice a year. There's a huge process associated with it. I believe you change the password twice. Yeah, Tom gets it. But I can definitely send out the link associated with that. The next is changing it every 90 days. Good for you. 17 years, sheesh. Yeah, that's definitely older than some interns. Next is NTLM-v1. I'm assuming a lot of us have heard of a responder attack by now. But essentially, responder is middlemanning NTLM v1 to get back clear credentials. This is another really common way red teamers get to stop working Monday. Last one is WSUS. Take the hint in it. This protocol is sus. There's several issues associated with it. I feel like every couple of weeks there's some new compromise associated with it. Do not use WSUS anymore, which is my perfect transition to zero trust with that. Zero trust is in some ways still a developing technology. And at this point, like it's something that we're still waiting on new things to come into place for it. I wouldn't, Microsoft did just release a zero trust assessment framework, which is really helpful, but I would kind of just take it as protocols that you wouldn't trust, just remove them, like WSUS, like NTLMV1. LLM&R if you can as well. These older things, just get rid of these protocols that you shouldn't be trusting. So then from here, we are going to do some Active Directory attack path analysis. So this would be you run a tool like Bloodhound, you get results back, and these are super simplified to help us be able to talk through these. But we can jump right in. The only thing to really know is that something like generic all, generic right, you'll see that listed here. Actually, let's just jump right in. You'll figure it out. You're smart. You got this. All right, so we have attack path number 1. So all of these, we're going to start from domain users. Domain users are, like I said, tier 2. These are your standard users. And these are all based off of paths that I have seen many times. These are probably some of the most common paths that I will often see. They're not always this many hops. In this case, we are showing 1, 2, 3 hops, but sometimes they are. Sometimes they're 16, 17, 18 hops, which will make an attacker's life much more painful. Sometimes they're just 1 hop. Sometimes you just get in the environment, you just Kerberoast, or you find a certificate, misconfigured certificate, and you get there from that. But we're going to go through some attack paths. And I think I said it, but this would come from like a tool like Bloodhound or Ping Castle. You'd be able to see paths this way. So we start off with domain users. We see domain users are able to RDP to an Apache server. This Apache server has IT admin Oleg logged onto it. And IT admin Oleg owns a domain controller because he promoted the server to a domain controller. So in this case, a domain user were to get compromised, Susan from accounting sees that email that's pretending to be from her son, that's not from her son, who says, click this link to see pictures from my cool vacation. She hasn't talked to her son in a little bit. She misses him. She presses on the link. All of a sudden, she's fish. From there, the user is able to see that they can RDP, so they RDP. With IT admin Oleg logged on to Apache server, they simply just dump LSAS, extract the credentials from it, and then they will log in as IT admin Oleg. Since IT admin Oleg owns the domain controller, they have full access to do whatever they want from there, and to finish their attack, it's game over. Any questions on that? Cool. Like I said, we are keeping these a little bit more simple. You can blame Oleg for them being a little bit more simple. The next one, you'd become local admin to be able to dump LSAS. The next one is pretty similar. We once again go to an Apache server that has domain admin Oleg logged in. In this case, we would just dump LSAS, and then we would hopefully get Oleg's credentials and be able to authenticate as him. So I think you're already seeing here the need for something like user rights assignments to prevent users from logging into places that they shouldn't really be logging into. Next one, we're keeping it just as simple. We can RDP to an SQL server that has unconstrained delegation set to true. Getting something with unconstrained delegation is true. We talked about that earlier, how you're able to get the TGT for any user that has logged in. You would be able to lure a domain admin to log in. or some other high privileged user, and then from there take their TGT and operate with that how you want to. Next, generic write is a permission that lets you write specific properties of that user. This is a simplified path that I saw within a company that my jaw dropped when I saw within the company. Essentially, there was an IT admin, not named Oleg, but in this case, it's Oleg because Oleg doesn't care about security. I don't know what his deal is. But we can see domain users can generic write. They have full control to him. And then his Active Directory is misconfigured so that he has generic write to schema operators, which is one of the tier 0 groups. But I did have a case where an IT admin did have, like, every domain user was able to control his settings. And I had him join the meeting, and because we were talking to their IT team about this, and that was a really fun call. Yeah, thank you, Adam, for clarifying. Yes, you do need local admin to be able to extract LSASS, since local admin has the SE debug permission. Like I said, we're taking some simplifications for this to help us understand the larger concepts. So next, we have an example of GPOs. So domain users have the ability to write GPOs in this case, and that GPO would apply to a domain controller. So a simple example would be, oh, you're good, Adam. You're good, Adam. I appreciate the assist. But in this case, domain controllers, domain users are able to write to the GPO, and then they could write something that forces some sort of call out to their C2 that gets pushed down to the domain controller. Hopefully your domain controller doesn't have internet access enabled, but there's a chance it does, or it allows you to add a specific user UR to its RDPers file so that you're able to RDP to the domain controller. This is the slide where we're really going to get a little bit more into this, but it is incredibly common, more common than it should, to be able to see domain users or authenticated users, some sort of tier 2 account, being able to write to various objects or have full control. Whether that's a GPO or OU or just a specific group, this is something I see way too often. If I'm being honest, this is my favorite vulnerability to find. I always love, well, misconfiguration, not vulnerability. I always would love to see like some GPO that we're able to write to. I don't know, just bring a smile to my face. It made me happy. But this is something that really is in place way more often than it should. And yeah, so this is a really good one to check, and it's a very simple one, but this can do some massive damage. So next, we're just going to talk about some of the basics of auditing Active Directory. Use tools like AD Explorer. That's the Microsoft one made by, I want to say, Mark Ravinovich. I think that's who it is. That allows you to see all the permissions within that. Bloodhound, Ping Castle, Purple Knight, pick a tool. I mean, Bloodhound is the one I used, and what those past couple slides were kind of based off of. And this is the methodology I would use for it as well. This is super simplified, but we would take those tier 2 groups, tier 2 users. We would look at their outbound permissions. So if I land as a domain user, what do I have access to? Can I write to GPOs? Where can I RDP to? Can I execute DCOM somewhere? Do I have generic write, generic audit, anything? So that's the first one with it. The next part is we're jumping to the end. So we start at the beginning with domain users. We go to the end of it, where we're looking at our tier 0 accounts. So we take every single one of those tier 0 accounts and groups that we talked about before, and we look at all of the inbound permissions associated with them. We look to see who's able to control them, who's able to add users to them. Is IT admin Oleg up to no good? And we take it amongst those things to go about it. You're going to find in there that you're just going to have connections you just unfortunately need. Just the way all this webs together, you're not going to be able to tether everything. So that's just something to keep in mind with this. I didn't realize that about Ping Castle. It may not be free anymore then. That's a shame. Also, within these tools, look for where your SPNs are. Understand the hops from the SPNs, because just as we have these paths, the other variation of it is like, pretend this is like some Apache admin account that has a service principal name. You can Kerberos, get that back, and then you could jump right to here. And it's almost like a shortcut within it. You would jump ahead several different nodes to where the SPN is, and then from there, you're able to jump, you're able to exploit any permissions that are there. And then just some other simple guidance: confirm no scanners in tier 0. We talked about SPNs and we talked about certificates. So that covers our on-prem. Any questions about on-prem before we move into Entra? Cool. All right. So next we're just gonna call out some super simple basics for Entra ID. Opinions about password max age. I would always recommend you change the password every year. I know there's different recommendations on it. I know some people say just have one strong password set, and then don't change it like the 1632 character, because users are likely to reuse passwords, which is also true, which all of us here at Flare can tell you about. I do like changing a password once a year. I do think it makes sense. Yeah, ideally use passkeys, but we know passwords aren't going away. But also, use Flare to make sure those passwords aren't leaked on the dark web. So Entra ID, super basics. It's an identity provider. Um, you store the various identities there, their associated resources. The idea with it is to log in once. Same thing with Active Directory. Log in once, and in this case, access all of your federated applications. The idea with this is to have this with Active Directory, and have your users synced across both platforms, at least in this case. Microsoft introduced conditional access policies with this. These are a series of if-then statements. We got our void Clippy right here, playing red light, green light, with these conditional access policies. I have a couple that I recommend, and we'll get into a couple more after, a little bit later. So require MFA with a strong authentication strength for all users and guests. We'll talk about authentication strengths later. Guests are really important to have conditional access policies for, because they are a big risk within it. They are authenticating through their original tenants to get to yours. So it's really recommended to have your own conditional access policies set for guests. Block legacy authentication. I believe Microsoft does this by default now, but I still wanted to put this up here. Require MFA for any sort of admin portals, any sort of Azure management. Yeah, that one's really important as well. Use MFA to alleviate user risk. So within Entra, Microsoft will have user risks, where they use a variety of signals that they have. They kind of keep this stuff under the hood, and if a user risk is set to high, make sure you're using strong MFA for them to validate who they are, using password reset, all of that good stuff. You can also mark a user as compromised, which will make their user risk high, which may or may not be something Flare has the capability to do. Next, require a compliant or hybrid device. This is something where we see this is definitely a process to move to that. We often see this being a pain in the butt for hospitals, because security is a pain in the butt for hospitals, where doctors want to bring their own devices. And that has a lot of issues associated with that as well. And then lastly, block access by geographical locations. I mean, if you're a company in Canada, maybe you have employees in Mexico, but let's say you don't. Maybe just don't allow logins from countries where you don't have people or countries that are known bad. I'm not going to say what known bad countries are. If you want to post them in the chat, feel free to. Privileged identity management. So PIM, we've talked a lot about PIM. PIM is essentially saying, I want to become this privileged user. I'm going to be this privileged user for 2-3 hours. Here is what I'm doing with it. And then I will have just-in-time access with this. There's two types of roles within Entra ID. There's active, which means it's always assigned. And then there's eligible. When it's eligible, that means you can PIM up to it to become that role. I've seen many instances where users are given highly privileged roles and they're always active. So just double check in your Entra environment what roles are active and make sure they're not super permissive ones. So this gets us to tiering in the cloud. There's not any official tiering stuff. The enterprise access model is something that is really more so on-prem. However, that hasn't stopped like community projects from taking place. This is one I really like, where they will tier various Azure roles, Entra roles, and MS Graph application permissions. So a tier 0 essentially is something of a global, like a family of global admins. It's able to compromise the environment. Tier 1 is something that has some sort of permissions or has some sort of path, whether it's direct or indirect path, to get global admin. And then tier 2 is essentially, those are often just your read roles, but those are roles with little to no security implications. This is a really cool website. Let me go to it real quick so we can all see it. But you're able to come in here, you're able to see, I'll paste this in the chat also. You're able to see what the role is, what type of path it has, a little bit more information of what the attacker could do. And an example, you're able to filter it by the associated tier. You're able to go through all of these and see the associated ones within place. And this hopefully is really helpful when you're handing out different roles to understand what exactly you're handing out and the blast radius associated with it. I don't believe they have this for everything, but there's really enough here to get you started and to really help you. So with all that said, we can start getting into some of these attacks. Starting off with Entra ID Connect. So yeah, I kind of lied. We're not quite in Entra yet. This is still on-prem. This is the account that syncs your stuff from on-prem to Entra ID. So it writes upwards to Entra ID. We can see right here, Clippy himself getting abducted by the cloud. These, since they're on-prem accounts and computers, the same rules apply to these. These are often targeted by attackers. They will look for your Entra ID Connect server, and they will target for that as well. It's a very common way for attackers to pivot from on-prem to the cloud. And since it's tier 0, but it's something that most people don't necessarily know about. I think I have. Yeah, so it's tier 0. It's something that Oleg is really bad with as well. It's something we'll often see IT admins be owners of because they're the ones that set up this infrastructure. So like the same path can apply where a user can compromise an IT account and then they're able to get to the Entra ID Connect system. So just same exact thing as we talked about before. Understand who has access to Entra infrastructure. Track who has that access, make sure your passwords are rotated, limits what is installed on there, use the host-based firewall if you can, do all of this good stuff. I do want to take a second though with this to talk about because I want to talk about federated applications and stuff. Drew, this would be the path that they are most likely to target from on-prem to the cloud, because this is going to give them everything, being able to fully access like keys to the kingdom to both. It's a 2-for-1. But I want to talk about federated infrastructure, because this is kind of falling under that line. When you have something like Okta, when you have Active Directory federation services, essentially what you're doing here is you are managing the infrastructure for yourself, which I said actually at the start of it is something we're starting to see come back more and more, because companies are hosting their IDP on-prem in case that goes out, they're still able to keep people working because productivity is good, as we all know. So when you are federating services, you are having on-prem infrastructure for it. I personally think it's extra to manage. It's Entra ID with extra steps. It is something that increases your attack surface. You're taking more responsibility. You're saying to Microsoft, you're saying to Okta, you're saying to Ping, hey, I don't want you having the responsibility of keeping this controlled. We are going to do it here to as much as we can. But then you have to make sure that is marked as tier 0 infrastructure, because that's another really not easy, but that's another really attractive attack path for these attackers, since once again, they can kind of get a 2-for-1 getting access to the cloud and on-prem. Next is MFA bypass. Phishing kits are, I feel like I'd stopped paying attention to them for like 2-3 months, and they just got even more advanced. Once again, we're targeting users being stupid. User error is always the case in this case. We're seeing tools like Tycoon 2FA, Evil Gen X, where essentially they're sending users links, and these users get these associated links. They don't realize it looks just like Microsoft. They don't realize exactly that it's not, and they are logging into this stuff. They're entering their authenticator code, and with that, that stuff is getting fully proxied through these attacker tools, and they're fully proxying it to Entra ID. So you think you're authenticating yourself? Nope, you're authenticating these people, these attackers going for it. This is something that we in Flare see all the time. We are seeing this stuff being sold. It is not that expensive. It is idiot proof. In the sense that you just make your link and you just send it out. The complexity has really gone downhill, and the fact that it's able to get the authenticator app as well is really interesting. Next is the ESTS auth persistent cookies. Everyone paste your favorite cookie flavor in the chat. Can't wait to see what you all come back with. But essentially, this cookie is something that we see a lot of time in info stealers. This is a really common item to get back. We'll show a screenshot of that in a little bit. But essentially, with this cookie, if the user already satisfied MFA, and if the cookie is still active, you are able to insert it right into your browser and just kind of pick up where the user left off. You probably want to use an anti-detect browser to at least try to copy some of the attributes of that, so you don't trigger like an impossible travel or anything along those lines. But this is a nice, relatively straightforward way to bypass MFA and some of the conditional access policies in place. By default, these cookies are valid for 90 days. So you may want to look at the sign-in frequency you have enabled and lower that, because 90 days is a really long time for an attacker to keep persistence in your environment. So MFA safeguards. Someone asked about YubiKeys, and we're going to talk about the different authentication strengths Microsoft has. Microsoft has 3: MFA, passwordless, phishing resistant, which is funny because passwordless really just adds the authenticator app. These are items I really recommend understanding in your environment what you have and what you don't. This is very similar to, honestly, like SPNs, where a conditional access policy gets made and users forget about it, or users get an exception for it and that gets forgotten about. I really recommend using the sign-in logs Microsoft has. So essentially forward the sign-in logs through log diagnostics so that it goes to an Azure Data Explorer instance. And then with that, set up queries to understand who's using what type of authentication. You want to move users across the journey from MFA to passwordless to phishing resistant. But we all know that the journey to get here is not straightforward. There's many issues associated with it. It can be difficult to get your organization to do this. The best advice I was given for this is essentially to get legal to make the statement, to be like, hey, we have to move to phishing resistant, and to get legal to kind of own the messaging. That way, IT doesn't necessarily seem like the bad guy if legal comes out and says, hey, we want to do this so we get hacked less, blah, blah, blah. App registration abuse. So this is a very common way for attackers to compromise the environment. Attackers will essentially look at all of the applications that you have in place. So not the apps on Clippy's phone, the apps within your Entra environment. And with these, essentially, uh, they will look for some of those risky tier 0 permissions that we were looking at earlier from that cloud tiering page, and they will attempt to compromise that app. So this could be anything from coding flaws, like some coding backdoors that allow them to get access to the app. If the app registration secrets is in some sort of pipeline, this is really common to find it in like a CI/CD pipeline where credentials are just hard coded. Or they could target the app owner. The app owner has full control of the app. So with that, make sure you understand who your app owners are if the application is assigned an app owner. And then from there, if they're able to gain access to the application on the control plane, they could essentially compromise the environment from there. So with that said, I'm not saying don't give people tier 0 access to your environment with application permissions, because there's going to be some where you're just going to have to. That is just the way it is. But just understand who you're giving it to, why you're giving it to, keep a documented case of that, understand the IPs that it's going to be coming from. Microsoft is getting more and more on top of this, and they are about to I think they already put out workload conditional access policies so that you can have conditional access policies applied to this to limit the sprawl it can take. Now, this same type of thing, this same type of attack, a little bit in a different sense, is also done with phishing, where users will try to get you to consent to an application. So attackers might have you somehow accessing some sort of application that you're joining, you're installing. There are some privileges that require admin consent. So with admin consent, some sort of IT administrator needs to approve it. And I believe Microsoft just gated a couple more permissions behind that. So you could still, though, take an application, consent to it, and then give it those permissions for your user. So that's also something to be careful of, especially in the age of AI, where like you could have emails.readall where you consent to an AI application, and then it's very easy for the AI agent to just scan through all your emails to try to find whatever it really wants there. So that's something I really do foresee happening. These AI agents getting permissions and being able to scan really quickly and extract the files that they want. Next one is device code authentication. This is another big one for red teamers right now, where essentially they'll call, red teamers, attackers, they'll do it. I think we're going to start to see also a pattern of people setting up tenants similar to your tenants. So like the company, we'll use Blockbuster since they're not around and they can't be mad. if we pretend to hack them. So a company could have the URL blockbuster.com. Someone could maybe register blockbuster123.com, or some sort of blockbuster with zero instead of an O, something that kind of is still passing, some sort of lookalike domain. Yeah, there we go, Blockbuster. And then from there, they would register an Entra tenant, authorize the Entra tenant to use that, and then you might get a Teams invite from an Entra tenant that looks just like yours, where the user's name is your boss. You get on it. They were able to pull enough AI videos to somewhat simulate the voice. You're not AI savvy. They ask you to go to this website. They ask you to enter this code. You do that because you don't want to let your boss down. They don't talk to you that often. They're asking you to buy gift cards. They're asking you to this website, enter the code. You do. And with that, you are giving them the ability to log into your account. So this is a really interesting one that is simple to do in theory. You just got to find someone gullible enough for that. Yeah, the recently popular rnicrosoft.com one was pretty funny. I do include here the query to look for in the sign-in logs for this to happen, but I really just recommend just like disable this with a conditional access policy. You don't necessarily need this. I mean, maybe you do, but evaluate if you really need this or not, and try to just disable, because this takes away an entire entry vector. Next, we have some conditional access gotchas I just wanted to call out. These are things I've seen in various client environments. The excludes, it's simple. I mean, these first two are really simple, but like I've seen so many instances where admins are just excluded. Specific applications are excluded that shouldn't be. Just be very careful with what you exclude. I'm hoping the conditional access optimizer agent that Microsoft released will really help to limit some of these. The logical OR is also a dangerous one. I've seen quite a few times the logical OR being used where it'll say compliant device or MFA. So that's a very simple MFA bypass because you can fake having a compliant device. There's a lot of documentation around how attackers do that online. And then you would just be bypassing MFA there. And that's an unfortunately pretty common one. Legacy protocol is still being in use. Make sure those are disabled. The trusted name location bypass. This is essentially having your VPN as a trusted name location. So you wouldn't require MFA once you're on the VPN, but you need MFA to get onto the VPN. This is a really big mistake that I've seen many customers make, where once you're on the VPN, you're able to access any application without MFA because theoretically you used it to get onto the VPN. But let's say you didn't. Let's say you compromised the user. Let's say somehow you got onto the VPN. You can jump around to any application there without needing to redo MFA. So even if you have a VPN and you're requiring MFA to get on the VPN, for critical applications, still require MFA. Next one is using per user MFA. There's a screen called per user MFA where it's another area to set MFA settings and conditional access policies. It's old. I think Microsoft got rid of it. But just in case they didn't, make sure you're not using that. Next one is VPN ranges. Put VPN ranges into your conditional access policies where you're denying access from them, except obviously your VPN if you're using it. But there's some sort of VPN GitHub ranges. I think this is it. No, this isn't it. But you can find VPN providers and their associated IP ranges. That's documented well online. There's GitHub pages for that. And then from there, if it's a VPN that your company isn't using, recommend having some sort of conditional access policy to prevent that. We talked about guests. And the biggest conditional access gotcha is the anti-detect browser, where you just go in, you found someone that got hit with a stealer log, you got their EST auth persistent cookie, you're able to replicate their location, all of their OS, their browser, their user agent, exactly how it is from the sealer log right within the anti-detect browser, and then pass through the ETS auth persistent cookie, and from there just pretend to be the user. So that gets us to our last part of this wonderful talk, which is how Flare can help. So this was the best I could get AI to create an image of Clippy and Flare as best friends. It was becoming too much time, so this is the best you get, unfortunately. It really did not want to do it. But how can we help? We recently launched the Identity Exposure Management module. So with this, what we're doing is we are identifying credentials on the dark web that are related to your Entra tenant. We are, with that, automatically testing these credentials that we find against Entra to confirm if they are valid or not. And if they are valid, we have 3 different options that we can go about to help remediate the associated user. Another really interesting thing with it is we have identity profiles where you can see all the linkage with the user and their associated blast radius from the sealer logs. We can call out where users have their EST auth persisting cookies leaked, and we'll show more of that in a second. Another thing is you could look up chatter on the dark web. It's really, really interesting to find forms of people talking about how they compromised a specific environment and the way they did it, because it really is a lot of these things that we talked about today. So that's a I mean, it's fun just to look up the chatter, just to look up the newer attacks that they talk about and see what they're going about. I definitely get lost doing that sometimes. I wanted to show this is our identity profile. This is an example of one. This is what our blast radius looks like. And then uh, the last thing I wanted to talk about was just with the EST auth persistent, we are seeing 9.7 million cookies of those online, which is absolutely an insane high number to see of these cookies being leaked online. But that was all the content I had for everyone today. So we could just take some questions from here. And yes, Dirk John is absolutely awesome. Highly recommend him. Highly recommend Road Tools. Anything that guy says is just amazing. So from here, what were the questions that I missed? Let me take a look. As well as if anyone else has any additional questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Yeah, so we got once an attacker compromises the on-prem sync account, what are common next steps into Entra? I believe using the sync account has like global admin like permissions within Entra. So it's really just escalating the attack with the on-prem sync account. For people who don't, yeah, AD Security by Sean Metcalf is great. I think I spent many Friday nights reading every single article on there. This will be recorded. This will be sent out. It'll be sent on the Flare Discord. I have some questions back here as well. Someone asked if Laps solves that problem. I don't know what problem they were talking about, but we can talk about Laps real quick because there is something to be noted around Laps as well. So Laps is local admin password solution. So this is Microsoft's way to control, it's like a password manager for local admin. It is a good solution. I do recommend it. It does help. The issue with this is that there's some default permissions in place, which I believe gives domain users, I can't remember the exact thing, but it gives domain users the ability to access like the lab server, something along those lines. I can't remember the exact thing, but there is something associated with it. I'll make sure to put that on the slides with that, the link to the article with that, because it gives something with all extended rights to any user that has lapse, which is certainly a big issue. Limited temporary admin accounts for the Vuln scanner. I think this is related. Yes, that is about being able to view the BitLocker keys. Thank you, Gavin. Um, Limited temporary admin accounts for the Vuln scanner. If it doesn't matter, I guess that would be a nice mitigation. But you're still caching the credentials on all of the endpoints. So even if it's limited, those credentials are still going to be there. Any other questions from anyone? Yeah, how to practice these security practices. So I guess Purple Knight might be the tool we've talked about. Uh, but having some sort of process to run some sort of tool to audit the environment, to understand the permissions in place with this, and being able to communicate to whether it's the CISO or whoever you can communicate to who about this, the issues associated with this to get the funding for it, to be able to fix these associated issues. I mean, you just need some sort of process to review what's in place and go about it. You're not going to necessarily be able to fix everything, just how businesses are, but being able to get some of the larger fish would really help. Where can we check the planned Flare events? I believe those are on our website, if not our LinkedIn. What about backup? Oh man, this is jumping around. What about backup service account that need domain admin level permissions? Um, I don't know what you necessarily mean by backup service accounts. I would try to push back against the vendor as much as you can. Personally, there's a really famous Sean Metcalf article straight up saying like, no, this does not need domain admin permissions, and it really talks about. It takes a couple of examples of some of them that say they don't and why they don't. Let me see if I can find that real quick. I'll find that later and try to include it in the PowerPoint. To combat permission creep, would it be recommended to have an audit of users and their job roles just to make sure they don't have more permissions? Yeah, I would just, yeah, I mean, that's something you're going to be able to see right with an Active Directory. Hopefully, you're going to be able to see their associated permissions. Uh, I mean, their user roles, their job title from Active Directory. One thing I think is really helpful is to look at like the Windows event logs to see what was done. And then just kind of the same thing as like something like OrderWorks, create kind of the fingerprint for what the user should do and what the user should not be able to do. That is very complex as well, but it could be really helpful for specific admin accounts you want to restrict. Um, This is jumping around a lot. How often should AD be backed up? Ideally every day, as often as you can. I know there's some tools that will automatically back it up and like let you refresh back to a snapshot of it. That's pretty cool. I don't know the name of those tools off the top of my head. Is McAfee actually good for security? I'm not going to say anything about McAfee. I don't want to touch that. Yes, Gavin, it is possible to do it. I'm gonna have to find the article for that when I'm not on camera. It should be a standard task to back up AD. Yeah, awesome. How will Windows AD by Microsoft recall? Uh, I was not familiar with Microsoft recall. Interesting. I mean, Microsoft is trying to use a it takes screenshots of your screen to find your activities. That's really interesting. I don't really have an opinion on that right now. I will say Microsoft is trying to use AI to fix some of the gaps that it has, which we're already seeing with like the conditional access optimizer. But recall seems like something completely different and honestly a little bit scary. Yeah, GDPR nightmare. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. This was a lot of fun. I hope you learned something, and hopefully I will be back here soon to give another talk. Feel free to say hi via LinkedIn or whatever. Nice meeting everyone. Take care.